Hey everyone, my name is Rooster and welcome back to Mechabellum. A new unit has recently been added into the game, the Sandworm. You can find it right here next to the other giants. This is a giant melee mech. It burrows underground when moving, taking no damage while underground and being unaffected by anything. Can't be damaged, can't be slowed, can't be EMP'd, you name it. Can't be touched while underground. And when it emerges, it starts attacking. It has the same hit points as a fortress, it moves as fast as a crawler, and its attack is 8,324 with an attack interval of 2.5 seconds and 12 meters of splash. It can only attack the ground, however, once we go through the text, you will see that it does have the ability to attack air as well, if you decide to give it that specific upgrade. I have been testing this unit for quite a bit, and today I want to showcase you guys the comp that I have had the most success with, how it works, how I like to set it up, and yeah, walk you guys through one of my games that I played on stream recently. Starting first with what techs I like to run. So, what do I think is mandatory? I would say that sandstorm as well as armor are mandatory. Sandstorm is the best tech on this unit by far. It is what makes it unique, at least in the tech department. What it does is that when it burrows out of the ground, it creates a sandstorm with a radius of 120 meters that lasts for 10 seconds. And all ground units, so air units are not affected by this, but all ground units lose 50% of their attack range and also take 30% less damage from ranged attacks. This applies to both your ground units as well as your opponent's ground units. So do keep that in mind. It works both ways. And this comes into play when you will see me playing my comp, where I decided to play with air units since they are unaffected. And I don't mess up a board of ground units on my own side of the board. Armor is really good. It's cheap. It increases HP by 50% and also has the armor effect, so this can be really useful against stuff like Mustang. But even without Mustang, the 50% increase in HP is massive, especially when you get like a level or even 2 levels and an item onto the worm. It starts being a massive slab of hit points that is hard to deal with. Now for my other techs, I like to run Mech Rage as well as Anti-Air. You could go for a different build. I don't really think there is a place for Mech Division and Replicate, even though they are interesting techs. Summoning these little sandworms, the larvae, they just aren't strong enough. And with Sandstorm being so good, it becomes hard to tech both Replicate and Mech Div and Sandstorm. In my experience, just trying to rely on Sandstorm is the most effective, and well, it will give you the most wins, in my experience. Mech Rage is fine. I also don't click it that often. You could swap one of these for underground maintenance as well. I think underground maintenance is a great tech, especially if you like to play something like Free For All, or maybe even 2v2, where you have to travel a bit more after having beaten the initial wave of AI enemies, or after having beaten your opponent in 1v1. This can be really good to heal the worms back up to full. But in 1v1, I like this setup. I haven't really regretted having it so far. Anti-Air is on the bar. It's a very cheap tech and can be interesting. If your opponent, as an answer to the worm, goes heavy into air, you could consider clicking it. As a second part, before we get into the replay, I quickly want to mention that I am running full carry wasp here. The build that we'll be doing is a carry wasp together with worm type of build, and I think that you need these techs. Range obviously is mandatory. You need the AA in case you need to deal with opponent air units. You need the ground spec because this will give you enough damage on the wasp so that they can deal with stuff like fortresses or melters, anything big really. And elite marksman is a lovely like third tech. If you manage to get into the late game, you've got some money to spare, you've got levels on your wasp, this will just boost the damage even more and give you that little bit of extra range, which, well, helps out the wasps a lot, because their main downside is that they have a very low base range, right? At 50, only going up to 90 with the range enhancement. So having the elite marksman there is important. So, let's get into the game. Enough chatting, and let's show you guys the build. Alright, here we are. This is a game against a player known as Red Hair in the English-speaking community, but I believe his name is Morning Wind in Chinese. A very, very strong player, probably vying for a spot of best player in Mechabellum. Has been at the top of the leaderboards for a long time and has remained there. So yeah, this should be a great test for our build. I decided to pick up aerial spec here because, well, it goes quite well since I will be going relatively... I will be relying on air units quite a bit. And I also really like the crawlers since they are the strongest chaff at the moment, really hard to deal with. And obviously, since they are melee, they don't suffer from the debuff of Sandstorm. In fact, it makes them stronger. They take less damage, and the things that counter them lose range. So you're able to get in a bit closer, and late game, you will see that this does have an effect. Now, my opponent starts with Quick Supply, Marksman Sledge, and decides to go for a triple Arclight purchase there. Tough first round for me with my Arclights and Mustang. I wasn't too happy about this. I decided to just set up my chaff, go for the double Mustang here, and try and push into at least one tower, because if I set up symmetrically, I will not even get close to the towers. This at least gives me a chance to kill some of his units and also reduce the amount of damage I take early on. Winning a round here is practically impossible, but at least I can try and save my as many hit points as I possibly can, so we can get into the mid and late game somewhat healthy. And as you see, indeed, like the triple Arclight purchase there is very strong. Opponent acknowledges the fact that my board is very weak to this sort of stuff and punishes it accordingly. Now, here on round 2, the thing that I'm lacking on the board currently is single target DPS, right? My opponent doesn't have chaff, so chaff clear isn't as much of a concern, but there's a lot of tanky things. There is sledges, there's Arclights, and the Mustangs are not good enough to deal with those. And I see the Elite Phoenix card here being shown. The other things don't really help me currently. They might be good late, but I think I have to try and stem the bleeding now. And so we do pick up the Elite Phoenix card here, because at least Elite Phoenixes can one-shot the opponent's sledges, which can't be done with a level 1 Phoenix. And I can unlock it for free, as I am aerial spec, and then I buy myself another crawler. Making sure that I have a lot of chaff early has proved quite successful for me in most of my games where I try and go for this setup, because at least during the mid and late game, I won't have to buy much more chaff. That will be set up, and I can use my deployments to buy the important units to counter what my opponent is doing. Opponent already, by the way, went for range there on the second turn, using the quick supply and going for an Arclight on my flank. We do manage to kill some units here. Maybe we even get a debuff, which we do. Phoenix takes out one marksman, but unfortunately gets distracted there on the sledges, and the marksman takes out my other level 3 Phoenix. Not a terrible round though, I'm pretty happy with that. Most things were killed, and it looks like I am starting to stabilize at least a little bit. Keep in mind that I also sold one of the Mustangs because it wasn't going to do much into a board without fangs, and their specialty is not trying to kill Arclights or sledges. So I'd rather get the money to be able to buy the units that will be useful. Now, in this round, both of us decide to go for the Wasp Swarm. I pick up another Elite Phoenix, which I put on the flank to deal with this Arclight. And I position those Wasps aggressively, trying to go for the tower. Opponent respects it though, buys his first packs of chaff, double fang behind the tower, should delay the wasp by quite a bit, and also does have 2 marksmen, which might turn and help out. I decide to pick up my own wasps in this situation, and instead I move the phoenixes towards the middle. I have really been liking these wasps, putting them defensively on the flanks, since they will be able to deal with most stuff. Here it's a bit unfortunate. Too many things to deal with. There are the fangs, the Arclight, and the wasp spawn. But we should be fine as the rounds go forward. We also managed to kill most of the sledges. So even though I do take some damage, again, like, could be worse. We also sold our second pack of Mustangs there. Here, the pack that's worth the most are the Stormcallers and the Rhino in terms of sell value. The Sabertooth is only 50 less, but in this situation, because my opponent was like kind of heavily committing to the flank, putting a Rhino there was probably the easiest. And I can sell the other Rhino and eventually sell out of this as well and get the full 600 credits of money for something else. Round 4, I decide to go for double Sandworm. And notice the positioning here, right? The Sandworms are relatively up front. They could maybe be even further forward. You don't want to put them on the line because the units, even though it's melee, will unburrow or stay unburrowed if anything is like 40 meters in front of them. So if you put them on the line, you run the risk that they won't burrow. And since I will be going for Sandstorm, that is a problem, right? I need them to burrow and then I need them to unburrow to activate the Sandstorm. Now, right now, I don't have the money for it yet, but making sure that they are positioned in a way where they will be able to burrow is important. And then also notice that the rest of my units are sitting around tower height or even further back. The reason for this is because during the time that the worms are traveling, they cannot be targeted. And so if your units are too far up front, it means the enemy units will start targeting your carries, right? Your phoenixes, your wasps. And that is not what you want. You need the worm to get near the enemy units, unburrow, activate the sandstorm, and then you want to be able to engage with your carries. Because the sandstorm will be active and will be protecting your air units. Again, like, rounds are not looking too terrible here, but I am losing some health. It would be really nice if I could kill this Typhoon, which looks like might be possible. Indeed, we do take it out, so that saves me another 150 hit points there. Quite happy with that. Subsidized Crawler shows up, which could be good, but I have no levels on the Crawlers as of yet. So instead, probably a skip for me. Yep. Ranged Specialist is way too expensive. And when I go Sandstorm, I don't really care about range that much anyway. Which is what we grab now. Get the Sandstorm. This is why we play it this way, right? Trying to get the worm to unburrow around this area and this area so that the Sandstorm will cover all of his ground units, the Typhoon, the Arc, and the Marksman, so that they lose the range. And then the Phoenixes and my Wasps can just DPS carefree without having to worry about especially air prioritizing techs, right? This build is meant to counter stuff like Mustang with anti-air, or even Mustangs with range, because they outrange the Wasps. But if they get hit by Sandstorm, now suddenly you've leveled the playing field and the Wasps come out ahead. Damage and defense enhancement also taken from the tower here for me. I go for another Phoenix because I want a little bit more DPS. Making sure that I can get rid, especially of this high-level Typhoon. An opponent right now just massing chaff. So realizing that my chaff clear isn't that good as of yet. And here, when I see this, right, immediately I have to start thinking there is a good likelihood that next turn I will have to deal with something like Shielded Fangs, right? And so I'm already planning my next turn. I'm probably going to be going into Wraith. Wraith has been extremely powerful lately. The best chaff clearing unit. And again, fits the comp really well, right? I'm aerial spec, I can unlock it for free. It's an air unit, so it won't lose the range. And it's good into Shielded Fangs as well. I've been a bit delayed. Usually I will pick it up a bit earlier, but I haven't really needed it this game since my opponent wasn't buying much chaff in the early game, so I had to focus a bit more on frontline and single target DPS, which is why here you see me building more Phoenixes and getting those Sandworms on the board. And we finally take a round, our very first round. Now my opponent, being quick supply with his starter, doesn't have the most starting hit points. We get a new free unit round on round 6. Here, Sabertooth looks like the most value to me. It could also be Steel Ball though. This is 650, I think, in value, and the Sabertooth is 600. So Steel Balls would be worth more along the Stormcallers, but the Sabertooth is a one-round sell, and I really value the money right now. Opponent goes for the Fire Badgers and decides to pick up some Overlords, which is an interesting choice. Not sure why. I guess it's good. The Overlord is good DPS against the Sandworms, and they don't get affected by the sandstorm, so I'm guessing that's why he went for it. But my high-level Phoenixes and potentially my Wasps should be really good into those boats. If I get another turn and get to click range and AA, I should be in a good spot. This turn, as I said though, we have to be a bit afraid, a bit wary of the potential of Shielded Fang. And so I buy myself Wraith with range and also Degeneration Beam to try and clear the chaff faster so that my Phoenixes are enabled and can hit the targets that I want them to hit, right? The Sledges, the Badgers, the Typhoons, and the opponent's newly added Overlords. Overlords with double tech, so I know that he is committing to this. Wasn't necessarily expecting it. If I was, maybe I wouldn't have clicked Degeneration Beam. At the same time, Degeneration Beam only cost me 400 there as a second tech, and if my opponent wants Photon Coating, he will have to pay 750. So probably still worth to try and bait that out. And I quite like my position here. I know that Wasps are, when scaled with range and AA, the best anti-air that there exists, especially when combined with something like Sandstorm, right? So we get another win. Opponent still decides to go for Shielded Fang, which I am a bit surprised about, since the Wraith tends to not care too much about the shield. Mostly because of their splash. I decide to use this defensively. I pick up 2 more Sandworms on the side. A bit delayed. The idea is that they will come in and hit these sides where there are a lot of units right now, especially here with the Typhoons. There used to be Typhoons here. Trying to basically keep the Sandstorm refreshed so that there is no way that the enemy ground anti-air will be able to lock onto my Phoenixes and Wasps. I decided to get some levels here as well. Got a level on the Sandworm. Make it ever so... make it more tanky. Getting the level on the Wraith as well. Opponent decided to sell out. I also sold that Rhino a couple turns ago. Opponent deciding to oil. Now the oil doesn't affect the Sandworm, as you will see. As long as it burrows, it can't be slowed, and since the only way that it can travel is underground, oil does nothing there. But of course it does slow down the crawlers, and if he does manage to ignite it, it will burn my crawlers. I'm not yet going into Wasp because I was trusting my high-level Phoenixes, right? In this particular game, I got that card and I decided to go for it. And Elite Phoenixes should be good enough to kill those level 1 Overlords. Managed to get a tower here, take down that Overlord on the left side. There is only 1 more left on the right. I do have a worm still, so I think I should be able to grab myself that tower debuff. Also notice that I am not loaning here, my opponent is. So I will be getting ahead a little bit in terms of econ. And now comes round 8. Missile Strike, Underground Threat, and Electromagnetic Impact show up. I probably don't go for electromagnetic impact here because my opponent seeing this might make him click photon to counter the degen beam and also counter that specific active. So no point in picking that. Instead, I go for the underground threat here. There are quite a few places where it could be annoying for him to deal with that. Or even for me to just use it defensively and have more chaff coming in. Opponent goes for the missile strike. This makes a lot of sense, right? Trying to hit my wasps. Easy target. This is the round, though, that I do decide to go for more level 2 wasps. I elite recruit them, and I imagine that they will be getting range and AA, yes. So for my opponent, missile strike here, a lot of value, right? Because I went from no tech blue wasp to double tech blue wasp. So, yeah, great value for him. I decided to go for replicate crawler finally. As I do have this underground threat. If it can replicate a bit, if it can distract his units, then that is more than enough for me. And replicate will never be bad in this situation. The late crawlers, as you can see, will often be doing at least some form of damage. And if they can get an assist on something, then creating more chaff is just so valuable. Yep, he does go for the photon, so that is what I expected, right? I'm pretty happy with that because as this game goes, I should be in a better spot with my wasps. The wasps with range and AA are simply better into the Overlord than the Overlord is into them. And since I already have the wasps, it's hard for him to go into an air-based counter as well. His best option here would probably be to try and get some AA fortresses, but it is a bit late with that, and the whole point of this comp and why you run Wraith is if your opponent decides to go for Fortress Anti-Air, at least you have the Wraith in front to tank. Fortress, speaking of the devil, does show up in this situation. Here I'm wondering about Steel Balls maybe as an option to run them in late, but my opponent doesn't really have much that the Steel Balls like to fight against anyway, so it's probably better to just take and sell, which I do. My opponent, though, keeps it, and there we see the anti-air barrage. Now, notice my setup. This has been thought of. The reason why I run it this way is because I have my Wraith here a bit forward, and the Wasps are a bit further back and towards the sides. The reason for this is so that if my opponent does go for something like anti-air, it will target the Wraith first, and hopefully it will shoot around this area. And so the Wasps get to evade the initial 1, 2, or even 3 waves of anti-air. And so they remain alive and they can DPS. I get a bunch of levels on the Sandworms here. Also deciding to go for oil of my own. Now, in this situation, I thought I could probably just end the game if my opponent set this oil on fire himself with the fire badgers. So that is the idea here. If I can get rid of all of those fangs, then the worm gets in. The wasps have an easy time targeting the overlords, and I should just be able to get a debuff and win the game. I also decided to pick up anti-air for the very first time. I have not clicked this very often. Usually, when opponents try to go for something like a Mustang defense, my second tech will be armor enhancement. But here, I thought it might be worth a try. Armor enhancement is good, but I want to see if the anti-air has some potential. Both of us are loaning. I get the temp speed, the temp range. Temp speed to just get in faster with the sandworms, and temp range just to help out my air units. And here you can see the first AA. It does clump up a little bit. And unfortunately, the second one here does go onto the wasps as well. But they are level 3, so they are able to tank at least one wave. This is also, by the way, the issue when you go range enhancement on Wraith. Most games I don't. Specifically to make sure that the Wraith is well in front of the Wasps. But here we aren't so lucky because we had to go range early to be able to chaff clear better. And so we are struggling a little bit. But I am at least able to take down one more Overlord. Can I take down one more? It does not look like it. So opponent striking back on round 9. Sending me down to 1,000 hit points as we hit round number 10. Absorption module, quite good on a worm here. And I do have the ability to make a level 3 sandworm. So I believe I should pick that up. The other ones aren't so important. Smoke bomb can be interesting, but I already have the sandstorm, which is just a better effect if I manage to land it correctly. So I think the absorption module here is an easy pickup. Yep, do pick it up. My opponent does the same. Puts it on the high level fortress. Makes sense. And here I decide to go for double war factory with missile interception, I would imagine. Yes. Now, usually I don't run this, but since my opponent is playing both Overlord and anti-air fortress, I thought this would be a good finisher. Also, notice that last turn, unfortunately, the Fire Badgers didn't quite manage to reach the oil, and so it never ignited. I think if it did, I would have won the round and won the game. But yeah, I should have positioned that a little bit more forward. Opponent does send out of the Fire Badgers, realizing that if this does get set on fire, he's in a load of trouble. Other play I could have made is like try and go for something like Elite Marksman. But the problem I have in this game is that I ranged my Wraith. And so there will be a bunch of clumping happening. Now the scary bit about something like this, where you play a ground unit like the War Factory, is that it does get hit by the Sandstorm as well. And as you can see, it loses all of its range. But luckily, missile interception is one of the techs that doesn't get affected by something like smoke or sandstorm. Anti-air barrage on Fortress does, so keep that in mind. The anti-air barrage, if the... and look at that animation, by the way. So cool. Such a cool anti-air animation. If the Fortress does get hit by a sandstorm, its range on the anti-air barrage will go down from 180 meters to 90 meters. Which does help with the wasps, but obviously, as I said, the wasps have a range of 90 when you just take range. Of course, with the tower range, it goes to 105, but it still isn't great, and you will often need the wraith to tank. Or in this situation, something like a war factory. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of how the comp ends up. The main way that I play this is usually with wasp carry. I might go into something like range and ground spec if my opponent goes heavy into like melters or fortress. If my opponent goes heavy into air, I might go range and then air specialization. You kind of have to feel the game and see like what it is that you need most. I would usually recommend that on wasps, you take range first, and then you see what you need as your second tech, depending on what your opponent is trying to counter with. Worms are really good, so try and get those on the board whenever you can. Sandstorm is great, like tech that first. That should leverage any problems that you may have dealing with anti-air. This is especially good into comps that try and rely on like Marksman and Arclight for chaff clear and Mustang for anti-air, because all of those will be debuffed. The way that you counter this is to buy early Fortress. So here the Fortresses weren't purchased early, right? They were given on round number 10 or round number 9. Getting them early, getting the anti-air on them is fantastic. The Fortresses have a pretty good matchup into the Sandworms and are able to kill them if they have some backup with chaff and other units. And the anti-air is great against early wasps, because the wasp player will not have access yet to having both a wraith, having range on the wasps, having ground spec on the wasps to be able to kill the fortress. And once they do get ground spec, you can go for your own wasps and tech range AA. And so you will be ahead with one tech, and the wasp worm player will probably be on the back foot, and you might be able to out-tempo them in that fashion. Anyway, if you have played this comp, have you had success with it? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Please do try this out. It's very fun. I have really enjoyed this, and it's viable even at the highest MMRs. I have managed to climb to 2150 MMR and even a little bit higher using this comp. So yeah, it definitely is viable. It takes quite a while to set up, but the scaling is insane. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for tuning in. If you did like it, please leave a like. And do check me out on Twitch if you want to see me play live. Have a lovely rest of your day wherever you are, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.